Watching, for everyone that's here. I hope you're having a very beautiful and blessed morning, that your past week has been blessed with many riches and glory. Um, so this week I wanted to talk about David. I know last week we were in Acts and we were talking about different qualities of leadership that Peter shown. Um, but this week I want to talk about David because everyone knows that David was a leader after God's own heart, or he was a man after God's own heart, but he was also called to be a leader. That's why he was. That's why Samuel seeked him. But I wanted to start in 1 Samuel 16, and starting in verse 1. This is the story originally when David is going to be anointed king. And it says, "Now the Lord said to Samuel, how long will you mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I am sending you to Jesse, the Bethlehemite, for I have provided myself a king among his sons." So immediately, God is sending Samuel to anoint a new king among the sons of Jesse. But then Samuel says, "How can I go? If Saul hears it, he will kill me." So Samuel is worried that if Saul hears, he will be killed. Just due to the fact that, that is kind of a threat to Saul's reign in some way, right? David is someone that's about to be anointed for the position that he's already in, right? But the Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Then invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do. You shall anoint for me and one I named to you." So in verse 4, so Samuel did what the Lord said and went to Bethlehem, and the elders of the town trembled at his coming and said, "Do you come peaceably?" And he said, "Peaceably? I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Sanctify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice." These people were, it's kind of interesting. It says that the elders of the town trembled. Samuel was such a powerful, right? He was such a powerful prophet of God that they trembled just at the very presence of Samuel being in that town. They had no idea why he's there, right? They're like, what in the world? So that just kind of shows you in general how powerful Samuel was as a person. Like, he was someone who was very renowned, right? If that kind of shows its own leadership quality and its own example. But having this person, right? God is sending Samuel to go anoint someone else as a king. Imagine how powerful that is, right? When Saul was first named king by Samuel, that was a huge thing, because it's Samuel. You know, Samuel has the reputation of Israel. Everyone knows who he is. So the very existence, and when he's in wherever place Samuel walks, even elders tremble at the fact of him coming because of who he is. And verse 5, he said, "Peaceably I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Sanctify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice." Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. And in verse 6, so it was when they came that he looked at Eliab and said, "Surely the Lord's anointed is before him." Eliab was the eldest son of Jesse's kids. And the reason why is because he was big in stature, right? He was the strongest and biggest of them all. But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not look at his appearance or at his physical stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart," right? Not all the time are you going to see leadership qualities in somebody based on their appearance. Sometimes, some people, the way they look can sometimes prove to you in some way, shape, or form, like, hey, the way he keeps himself, the way he dresses himself, the way he takes care of himself, right? His outward appearance seems to be someone who has the qualities of being a good leader. But just because someone looks good, or they have big stature, or they work out, or they look healthy, or whatever the case may be, right, does not always mean that they actually have the ability to be a good leader. There are plenty of people who are very successful, right, in their fields, and they made their money and doing whatever they're doing and whatnot, but their leadership qualities are very much lacking. They got to where they're at based off other reasons, probably, that may not be leadership qualities that are worth looking for or following. A lot of them end up having employees or people underneath them, right, in places of leadership where they do not like them at all. Like, they don't care for their boss. They think their boss is horrible, or whatever the case may be. And that's not the kind of leader you want to be. You want to be a leader that is respected, right? But Samuel was looking at Eliab from the outward appearance and just seeing, just based off his looks, oh God, surely, right? Surely this has to be the one, just based off how he looked. And that's why God knew Samuel's heart and immediately was like, all right, just because surely that this is the Lord's anointed, before you think he is going to be anointed before me, I already tell what you're doing. God immediately responds, look at the outward appearance. So then Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel, and he said, neither has the Lord chosen this one. Then Jesse made Shammah pass by, and he said, neither has the Lord chosen this one. Thus Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, and Samuel said to Jesse, the Lord has not chosen these at all, basically, right? The Lord has not chosen these. I'm guessing Jesse's probably like, what in the world, right? Like, these are all of my strongest, biggest, right? My most mature sons. These are the ones that are ready to fight. They have great qualities. They're good shape, But then Samuel said to Jesse, the Lord has not chosen these. And Samuel said to Jesse, are all the young men here? And then he said, there remains yet the youngest, and there he is keeping the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, send and bring him, for we will not sit down until he comes here. So he sent and brought him. Now he was ruddy, with bright eyes and good looking, and the Lord said, arise and anoint him, for this is the one. Now, you have to remember, they had him watching the sheep because to them, he was the lowest of the sons, right? He wasn't that important to them. He was the one, because Jesse didn't even call him in, right, originally. We're talking about a person, because we're talking about the leadership qualities of Daniel, how David was a leader after God's own heart. So the fact that Jesse didn't even think that David was important enough to invite, to see Samuel the prophet anoint someone in the family, right, to be the next whatever, he had he didn't even call him. David was a nobody to them. To Jesse, he wasn't important enough to be like, you go watch the sheep. The older sons are probably the ones that Samuel wants to see, but that ended up not being the case. Right? So, arise, anoint him, for this is the one. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel rose, and then he went to Ramah. So, immediately, right, how do we see that the possibility of this person being a leader, right? When David first became a leader, the Bible makes it very clear that that the young man had become a leader long before he ever received the title. So remember, David is leading the sheep, right? He's in charge of the sheep, and he did it diligently. He wasn't a slacker. He didn't slack off when he was taking care of the sheep. He's very diligent and watching, right? He made sure his sheep were safe. Remember, we know that later on that he ends up saving the sheep from a lion once, right? He literally fights one with his fist. It's crazy. David goes through multiple different times, right? He's going through different things, and the fact that he's capable of being so focused he has a job that Jesse didn't. It was basically for the lower. I'm sure he never made the older sons ever really watch them. He was like, y'all are doing your thing. You can go do whatever you want. I have different things I want you to do. David, you're gonna go watch the sheep. No one cares about that. He didn't see David as much of a person that could be in a place of leadership, but God saw, right? God saw. But here's the thing: when David was anointed, right, with the oil, what happened later? Saul was troubled, right? If we go on to verse 14, but the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a distressing spirit from the Lord troubled him. And in verse 15, Saul's servants said to him, surely a distressing spirit from God is troubling you. Let our master now command your servants who are before you to seek out a man who is a skillful player on the harp. And it shall be that he will play it with his hand when the distressing spirit from God is upon you, and you shall be well. What's this building up to, right? What a coincidence that David is about to be the one that's going to be called upon. who just received the Spirit of the Lord that departed from Saul. Right? So Saul said to his servants, "Provide me now a man who can play well, and bring him to me." Then one of the servants answered and said, "Look, I have seen the son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, who is skillful in playing, a mighty man of valor." They're already saying this young kid, right, is a mighty man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, and a handsome person, and the Lord is with him. A young man, right? They when they went to go seek out someone who could play the harp, they give David the utter, like, this compliment, like, right? They're already saying he's a great man. This guy is a mighty man of valor, a warrior, prudent in speech and handsome, and the Lord is with him, right? So therefore Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, "Send me your son David, who is with the sheep." So they sent for him immediately. But isn't that crazy, right? David, who is going to take the leadership, the place of leadership that Saul is in, is the very person that they sent for to come to soothe his spirit, because the Spirit of the Lord left. But now the Spirit of the Lord has also entered David as well, right? To recognize that David was going to be a leader, the young leader first began to surface in these specific chapters, right? David's example shows that true leaders always declare themselves without making announcements. No one knew, right? David was the lowest of the low of his brothers. No one really, his family, even his father didn't really care to call him up when Samuel was there. So, David was in the midst of being unannounced. No one knew. It was not obvious. But to others, it eventually became obvious, right? But too often we feel forced to pick someone to lead, whether they are a leader or not. We have to be able to find the right person to lead. That's why when you can't jump to a conclusion. That's why when God said to Samuel, "I don't look at the outward appearance, right? I look at the heart." It's because more oftentimes than not, people will feel forced to just pick someone to lead, whether they are truly capable, right? And Samuel was sent on this mission to just find someone to replace Saul. While in the midst of all this, he was afraid, right, that Saul would kill him. So he's kind of in his own bind, right? He's a little bit panicked. He's over here trying to do what God wants him to do, and he doesn't want to disobey God, but he's also afraid. So to him, he kind of felt like he was being forced to pick someone else to lead. So whether they were a good leader or not, he just kind of saw oh, he's strong, he looks capable, let's choose him. And God was like, "Nope. Well, what about him? Nope. What about him? Nope." And so now it's Samuel was probably getting confused. So that's why you don't want to make a mistake when picking a leader, right? Looking at looks, or even picking from past example, or even picking from the pecking order, because that's what he was doing at first. He was picking from the order, oldest to youngest, right? He started with the oldest son, saw him, and went down, because Jesse was like, "Well, what about the oldest? Okay, what about the second? What about the third?" He was showing him all that. You also don't want to pick a leader that's opting for age or tenor over ability, right? So now when we find out, not only was he skillful at being able to keep the sheep alive, for starters, right? He was also very capable and skillful at playing the harp, and he was given immediate, right, response. They told Saul, a mighty man. He hasn't even accomplished anything great that everyone's gonna know about, right? He hasn't even killed Goliath yet. No one even knows the stories of what he's done when he's protected the sheep yet. No one knows about that stuff because he's never claimed it, right? He didn't claim any of those stories, and he hasn't killed Goliath yet. And these people were already calling him a mighty man of valor. A mighty man. He's a mighty man of valor, and the Lord is with him, and no one even knows who he is yet. And he's coming to play the harp for Saul, right? And 1 Timothy 3, verse 2, it kind of gives an example of what a leader is supposed to be. It says, an overseer then must be above reproach, right? The husband of one wife, temperate, prudent, respectable, hospitable, able to teach. Just from that starting point right there, we see that David is already respected in some way, shape, or form, without even anyone knowing who he is. They announced him as someone that was great, so he was respected. He came with hospitality. He was kind, right? They sent for him, and oh shoot, I skipped the verse. These pages are very thin. They sent for him, right? Because in verse 20 of 1 Samuel 16, he says, "And Jesse took a donkey and loaded with bread, a skin of wine, a young goat, and sent them by with his son David to Saul. So David came to Saul and stood before him, and he loved him greatly and became his armor-bearer. Then Saul said to Jesse, saying, Please let David stand before me, for he has found favor in my sight." Once again, he earns respect, right? He was hospitable toward him immediately. But other qualities of being a leader also require you to be able to teach, not addicted to wine or pugnacious, but gentle and peaceable, is what 1 Timothy 3 says. Pugnacious? Is that what it is? Yeah. My bad. Pugnacious. But gentle, peaceable, free from the love of money. He must be one who manages his own household well, keeping his children under control with all dignity. But if a man does not know how to manage his own household, how will he also be able to take care of a church of God? So these are two different examples, but this is showing some leadership examples as well. Someone that's going to be respectable, who can hold their own household, right? So if David is going to be a man for God's own heart like we know him to be, he's going to show some of these qualities. But if we're talking about someone who gained respect, right, who was capable of listening, capable of understanding, not only that, he also respected people of leadership, right? He was not conceited in any way, right? Immediately, he found favor with Saul. A person who is a leader will never find favor with no one, right? If you have capable qualities of being a leader, you will find favor with people. But if you're not capable of being a leader, people will not find favor, right? You will not be able to find favor with others, and they won't be able to respect you or how you do things or whatever it is that you are doing. You want to be able to be a leader that can find respect. David hasn't even stepped into a place of leadership. Already. He immediately, though, gains Saul's sights, right? He finds favor in the sight of Saul just by coming, playing the harp, right? And soothing him. So, in verse 23 it says, "And so it was, whenever the Spirit from God was upon Saul, that David would take a harp and play it with his hand. Then Saul would become refreshed and well, and the distressing spirit would depart from him." So even though Saul was no longer anointed as king, and the Spirit of the Lord left him, David was filled with the Spirit of the Lord, and David was there, right? This is a good example. Right? Even when people are no longer in a place of leadership, right? But they can still find favor with someone who's a good leader, people will still see that. Like even nowadays, right, if you're looking at different companies and whatnot that are doing well or whatnot, if they don't have a good reputation, if somebody of good reputation, right, says, no, these people, right, they're great people, their job and their business is awesome, blah, 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 whatever the case may be, and they uplift them, people will see that someone of reputation is saying, no, hey, don't listen to the rumors of what they're saying about them. They're okay. They're going to be like, oh, you know what? It's okay. They'll start buying from that company again. Maybe they stopped doing something with that people or that certain business or whatever it might be. And you stop wanting to buy whatever they sell or whatever the case may be. But because someone of reputation might come along and be like, hey, this is that, right? It helps. And it's in the same essence here. The Spirit of the Lord left Saul, but because the Spirit of the Lord was in David, Saul was able to still feel the freshness of God's Spirit because David was there playing him the harp and worshiping Jesus, or worshiping God, in front of him, right? He was able to lift his spirit. But in in chapter 17, verse 1, "Now the Philistines gathered their armies together to battle and were gathered at Socho, which belongs to Judah. They encamped between Socho and Azekah." Oh my gosh, these are some. I'm going to have to look up some Hebrew. Is it Soko? In Ephes Damim. Bear with me. I love Jesus. It's okay. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and they encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in the battle array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. So remember, now this will be the first example of David showing that he has leadership qualities that he has, right? A champion arose. Here comes this huge guy, Goliath from Gath, right? Massive man, right? But I'm gonna go ahead and skip for a couple of verses to verse 26. This is when David comes up and he says, "Then David spoke to the men who stood by him, saying, 'What shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?'" So we're going into this, right? David has yet to accomplish beating the Goliath, but we know that he's already showing that he has qualities. He's like, hey, what are we doing about this? Why aren't we doing anything? Who is he to defy God? And the people answered him in this manner, "So shall it be done for the man who kills him," right? Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was aroused against David. He's mad, right? Eliab is supposed to be the big, strong, tough brother, is upset that David is the one that actually said, "Hey, what's going on? Why aren't you guys doing anything about this Philistine who is literally taunting us? Like, are we not trying to get rid of him?" But Eliab gets mad in verse 28, and he ends up saying, "Why did you come down here, and with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle." But David said, "What have I done now? Is there not a cause? Is there no reason for me to want to be here to fight?" Right? Then he turned from him and toward another and said the same thing, and those people answered him as the first ones did. So, now when the words which David spoke were heard, they reported them to Saul, and he sent for him, and David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with the Philistine." So David is showing that he has qualities to step up, right? He's like, look, if no one else is going to fight this giant of a man, I'll do it. I don't care. And you have to remember, at the time, David is not that big, right? Like, we know that David is not that big. He wasn't tall in stature yet. He wasn't extremely in shape like his older brothers were. He wasn't, like, huge. Not that he was not in shape. He was in shape. Like, I'm positive David was in some kind of shape. I mean, he was watching the sheep. He fought off, a lion and a bear, and I'm sure he was in shape. I mean, God obviously granted him the strength to do that as well. But like, I'm pretty sure David was not out of shape in some way. Like, he was in shape, but he wasn't big yet, right? He was still a young man. He was not big in stature like his brothers were, and he wasn't known. No one knew him. He was just at this point in time now, he's just an armor bearer to Saul. Right? He found favor in Saul's eyes for playing the harp and helping his spirit to be soothed. So he's just an armor bearer. Right? But Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he a man of war from his youth." So Saul's even saying, you're not even truly a man yet. You're still young. Like, you're not like fully a man. But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and struck it, and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck it and killed it." So now he's telling Saul, look, I'm not afraid of no big man. It's just a man. I fought beasts. Like, I literally fought a beast. So he's not afraid, right? This is just kind of showing already the leader, like, David is showing leadership qualities of no fear, right? He has no fear. He is capable of stepping up to the plate, right? If a leader wants to take control, or if a leader wants to step into a position to make a difference, you must do what first? You must take the first step, right? If you have fear on taking that step forward, right, in whatever place of leadership you're at, and whatever business you own, if you cannot take the first step in knowing that, hey, this might help out, you'll never know, right? David had God on his side, and he knew that, so he was like, look, Your servant killed both of them, struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. So he's saying, look, God was with me when I killed this lion and bear, and this man is defying God, so I know for a fact that God's going to back me up, right? He's not afraid. So then Saul said, go ahead, basically, go and the Lord will be with you. So Saul clothed David with his armor, but David did not like it. David fastened his sword to his armor and tried to walk, but he couldn't, And David said to Saul, I cannot walk with these, for I have not tested them. So David took them off. Then he took a staff in hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, put them in a shepherd's bag and a pouch which he had, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. So the Philistine came and began drawing near to David. And we know how this goes, right? Goliath starts taunting him, basically saying, so the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? This is verse 43. And the Philistine then cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. And David was just like, yeah, sure, man. Like, yeah, you come at me with a sword and a spear and a javelin. And he said, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of armies, Israel, whom you have taunted. And then we know how that story ends. David slings that sling and throws it at him and strikes him dead, right? You have to remember, this kid is gutsy, man. Like, he's walking up to this giant of a man with a huge spear, sword, and armor. And, like, I guarantee any person now, if you were for sure, you were not confident God was going to back you up to fight some 9, 10, or no, he's like 6 cubits high, which I think is like 10 feet now, or 10 and a half feet, I believe. It's like 10 feet, right? I think it's about 10. Dude's like 10 foot tall, monster of a man, right? Like, if he was standing here, I'd probably be like, oh my God, like, that's like a whole 5.5 feet taller than I am. I'm not very tall in the first place. So, like, this dude's huge. If I wasn't sure that God was going to for sure back me up to kill that man, I'd probably been like, hey man, I'm good. Like, I'm not trying to do that. But David was called to be the next king, right? And the Spirit of the Lord was with him, and he knew that God was with him. So he was not back down. So just like any moment, a leader who has favor from others will never back down to make the right decision, right? If you know that God is there and to back up every decision you make, and you are in a place to make decisions like that, you have the qualities to become a leader, or whatever the case may be, God will call you to be a leader, right? If you're not called to be a leader, God would never call you to do anything. But all of us are called to be leaders in some way, shape, or form. It just depends on what we decide to do to step into that calling, right? If we are incapable of stepping into the leadership calling that God gives us, of course, we're not going to be able to see the perspective of others, or to understand others, or to see what they want to do, or whatever, right? A good leader listens to others, but a good leader also follows and listens, right? If you're capable of listening to the people around you, but you're also capable of teaching them, they will follow you, right? And they will understand you. And this was a great example. David showed that, hey, our God is mightier than you'll ever be. And when the people of Israel saw that, right, they praised him, they glorified. They're like, oh my gosh, like they were all surprised, amazed. Saul even was like, oh my, amazing, right? But victory is always fun, and no one likes to lose, right? So when a leader practices, understands what it means to have victory, it can impact you more as a leader, and it will impact everyone around you as well, right? If you are in a place of leadership, when you win, if people respect you, right, what happens? They win as well, right? If you're doing like when you're doing a group project at school, right, and maybe you were like in charge of doing the project, or maybe you're the one doing most of it, right? When you did well, the project went well. What usually happened? Everyone was like, "Oh my God, Daniel," or whoever it was. That was a great idea. It worked out so well, right? You get praised for it in some way, because they see that, hey, this was a good idea. We all worked on it. It worked, right? And victory can lead to you coming together. And when sometimes if you end up not doing that well, or the project fails, or whatever the case may be, if you've already established that you can be a good leader in the first place and people respect you, Even in moments of failure, right? People are still gonna be like, hey, no, 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 let's get this together. It's okay. It's not a big deal, right? I mean, that's how discoveries are made. That's how things are found out. That's how we, right, progress forward in general, right? Construction can't be done for something if it's not being progressed, right? But if you're going to finish whatever you are working on properly, you also want people around you who will be understandable and teachable as well. And a good leader can see who is teachable. People who are not capable of being teachable are not probably not going to stick around that leader for much longer, right? Because they're not showing qualities that are teachable. And David was someone who was a man after God's own heart. He was a teachable man. God showed him that, hey, look, just for example, God showed him that he was capable of fighting off the lion and the bear. So then he was like, look, I know that God's here. I know that God's with me. So if I'm capable of fighting off a lion and a bear, what's a man supposed to be? What's a 10-foot guy? Who cares about this giant of a man? Like this, he's not capable of doing anything if God helped me in the first place fight off beasts. And that's the same thing. If God has helped you to progress forward in some way, shape, or form, then why are you afraid to do more, right? You are in a place to make a difference. You just have to be able to show conviction for what God is doing in your life, right? Step forward, take that step, try to impact, especially if you have a place where you are capable of making some difference in front of people, you're being looked up to, right? You got to set an example, right? As a leader, sometimes there are too many people. You don't even realize how many people are really looking towards you for just an answer, right? They're like, hey, like, Daniel, how do you feel about this? I'm like, well, I don't know, right? I don't know is not going to help them, right? Just saying I don't know is not going to help somebody. If I want to make a difference to their lives and I realize, hey, they're actually trying to ask me a question because they look up to what I'm saying and they want an answer from me, in that moment, just be certain in who you are, what God is doing through you. Gives them an answer, right? David immediately responded, didn't he? He saw that no one was going to step forward. No one was taking action to fight Goliath. And so he immediately says, I'll do it, right? This little kid who watches sheep, who is an armor bearer for Saul, nothing else. He's never had combat in war. He's not that big, right? Like Saul said, he's just a young boy still. He is the only person in the entire camp, not even the king, right? He was the only person in the entire camp that said, I'll go fight him. He took that step forward, right? He was capable of making that decision, right? We must consider David in his battle with Goliath. By practicing the idea of victory, he transformed the once paralyzed Israelite soldiers into a force capable of defeating the invincible Philistine army, right? And I love this example. I was looking at, because this is John Maxwell's like Bible thing. I love the examples he shows, and I wanted to read some of them because I think it's really powerful. He says that this is how David did it, right? He says the first thing was his perspective differed from others. He didn't see what everyone else saw, right? Everyone saw that Goliath was invincible. He just saw opportunity. He was like, this is an opportunity to prove that God is truly with us, right? His method also differed from others. He decided to use proven weapons that he knew would work, not the conventional ones. He used something that he was convinced would work because he's used it before. He's used stones to sling and stuff. He's practiced with it, right? So he had his stone and sling because he's practiced with it consistently. He knew how to use it, right? If you think about it, a man who knows how to use one weapon or masters one weapon over someone who just uses multiple things is more likely to be more dangerous than the person who can use multiple weapons, right? If I gave someone a gun and he practices with just that one gun consistently for years and he understands, like, okay, the sights are perfect, the way it shoots has this angle, does this, does that, I know how to pull the trigger properly, I know how to reload it, I know how many bullets are in it. Like, he understands, he focuses, he knows every single little bit about his gun, right? And then you give someone else just a bunch of guns. They've shot them a couple times. They kind of understand how some of them work. They're like, yeah, I have all these awesome guns or whatever. And you're like, hey, I want you to pick whatever gun that you tell them, hey, pick whatever gun you feel most comfortable with. I want you to have a shoot off or whatever, right? the one who understands and masters his weapon is going to win over the person who doesn't understand his weapons. David understood. It may not have been conventional, right? It didn't seem conventional. His weapon was a sling and a stone against a giant with armor, a spear, and a shield. This dude had weapons that were, I guarantee if he threw that spear at someone, right, it could impale like 3 or 4 men. It was a big spear. But he had a stone and a sling. But this stone and sling, what is something that David mastered. So his methods were different. His conviction was different as well. He recognized that Goliath had no covenant with God, so he felt passionately committed to God in some way, right? He knew that God would for sure take that step. His motives were different. He heard Goliath's threats, right? And immediately he knew that God could beat him. He also wanted to make Yahweh known to the world as the most powerful God on earth, right? Because he saw this was a vision. He was like, look, this is an amazing opportunity. He's like, clearly no one's stepping up, so I'm going to take that place. I will take that step, right? The experience was also different. He also, prior to fighting Goliath, he brought to the battlefield past victories over the lion and the bear. So like, he was unafraid, right? He had experience. So that's another good leadership quality. Remember, we've talked about experience, right? Is very good when it comes to being in place of leadership. If you have zero experience, whatever you're leading in is not going to succeed properly. You have to have experience in whatever field that you are trying to be a leader in to truly make an impact on that field. If you have zero experience in whatever you're doing, of course it's going to be hard for you to actually lead people, because they're not going to be able to believe or understand what you're saying, because you're not going to be able to teach them properly because you have zero experience in it, right? Like if I've never actually designed, like if I say, hey, I want to go build a small little doghouse thing or whatever I wanted to do, but I had zero experience in building it, and then I try to explain to someone else how to build a doghouse when they ask me, I'm like, well, you do this and you do that, blah, 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 but then they oh, could you show me? You're like, oh, I can't really. I've never actually done it, right? Just because you study how to build a doghouse doesn't mean you actually know how to build a doghouse, because you have no real hands-on experience in doing it. So David had prior experience in battle in some way. He fought a lion and a bear, and to him, he was like, this giant of a man is no different. It's just another beast, basically. It's a man that's defying God. I have no reason to be afraid. But the other thing that was different about him being in this position was his attitude. He saw Goliath was not a threat too big to hit, but as a target too big to miss. I love this wording. John Maxwell says he's not a threat too big to hit, but a target too big to miss. That's great. It's awesome, because you think about it, that was easy, right? He had his sling and stone. He's like looking at this guy like, man, if I miss this, I'm horrible. Obviously, I'm stupid, because I look at it, he's swinging this thing. He has plenty of practice with his stone and his the stones and sling, right? And he's looking at this thing, and he's like, there's no way I can miss this, right? It's a big guy. It's a big guy. He knew that he could win. God was on his side. He knew. So these were perfect. This was literally, if anything could have not gone more perfect than this, David was put in the perfect position to show how great he could have been as a leader, right? Yeah. He wasn't even a king yet. We don't even get to see how great of a king David's going to be yet, right? He's just an armor bearer for Saul. Could you imagine being you are the lowest of your father's sons? No one sees you as anything that great. They don't even care to call you to come see Samuel in the first place. Then you get anointed in front of all your brothers. Then you get called by the king to play your harp. Then you gain favor by the king to be his armor bearer. And then you step up in front of the entire army to fight this giant and say that God is with me. I'm going to kill Goliath. He kills Goliath. You think that's all him? No, God was with him every step of the way of his journey, right? To become one of the greatest leaders that Israel's ever known, right? That's why we call him David, a man after God's own heart, because he was a king that succeeded in being a man after God's own heart, right? After him was King Solomon. King Solomon was a great king, right? But David is still renowned as one of the greatest kings ever in Israel, right? And it's because of this. It's because of his beginning. His beginning signified what he was going to do in his future. So, if you're going to step into a place of leadership, you have to signify your beginning. You have to figure out a way to start, right? Make yourself known in some way. Like, hey, I am capable. I am strong. I know that God is here to back me up. And then you want to establish, right, the experience you have. If you're going to lead, right, and be in a place of leadership, you must prove that you have experience, that you have conviction, that your perspective is outside the box. Because when people see an outside a box perspective, they're like, "Well, wow, this is actually kind of different. Let's give it a chance," right? But if they see you have the same methods, same perspective, same idea as everybody else, they're like, he's just another guy who wants to make money, wants to lead people, and that's it. You know, he just wants to own some business and make money. He's not going to make a difference. That's not what you want to do. You want to be able to gain a different perspective from others, show them that you have a different method, that you have conviction for something, that your motive, right, is a motive for something great. It's not just everyone else's version of, oh, I just want to own this business or be a leader in this thing because I want to make money. So that's not what you want to do, right? It's not the only thing you want to do. If you're going to own some kind of establishment, right, you want to be able to have some money, yeah, but you want to be able to do this to make a change as well, to make an impact in other people's lives, right? A good leader will make impact, but a bad leader will fail. So, David taunted, right? David was walked up and he was taunted by Goliath, made that difference, showed him and the rest of Israel, hey, you have nothing to fear, right? Nothing to fear at all. So you remember Saul was a very experienced soldier before this. Even he was cowering before fear. David was able to take that step. So we want to be like David, right? We want to be able to lead, right? Be an example without fear. Have conviction and show people that we have this conviction. Be able to show that we have experience in whatever we're trying to do, right? Because if you're going to take a place in leadership, you want to be able to experience first. Don't ever try to, like I said, I can't lead someone to how to build a doghouse if I actually have no hands-on experience on how to build a doghouse in the first place, right? It's just going to look bad on me. If I'm like, hey, I'm going to own a business where I build doghouses, but I have zero experience on how building doghouses, that doesn't make sense. If you want to own a business that requires you to do a certain field, I think you should probably learn that field first, You want to be able to experience that field. It's the same way as when you're a leader of a church. If you're trying to lead a church, you want experience on how to step up and be a leader in a church first, right? Before you take that position to be a leader. Because if you have no idea how to be a leader in your church, then you probably shouldn't have that position in the first place. You don't want to be a pastor or whatever in a church either, or even be able to be on a pulpit to teach other people stuff if you have no hands-on experience doing it. Right? That's where practice comes in. You practice experience, you practice teaching, you practice doing different things so you can have the experience to actually teach in front of other people. Right? Experience creates opportunity. And when you have the opportunity, you deliver, right? You want to be able to deliver on that opportunity. But these are all, like I said, these are all great qualities of David. David was able to step up, take that position. He had conviction, right? He was unafraid. So whenever looking for a leader, you don't want to look for someone just because of their looks or their outside appearance. You never want to follow someone based off their outside understanding. You want to follow someone based on their heart. And David was definitely a man that you could follow after God, right? Because he showed the qualities that he was able to take these steps to make a difference. Because I remember, like I was reading in 1 Timothy, he was someone respectful, someone that was not addicted to certain things. He was gentle, and even though through all this, David was capable of showing that he is someone that can lead. He hasn't even started yet. He wasn't even there yet. he was still a nobody at first, and then he became an armor bearer, and then he stepped into this place of, this is who I'm going to be, right? Steps into that field, kills Goliath, and boom, now he is well known, right? So change the perspective of others around you. Have yourself different methods, right? Show conviction, show that you have motive, show that you have a vision, gain experience in the thing that you want to do, and your attitude, right? Your attitude must show that you are capable of taking the big hits, right? And that you're also capable of delivering as well. So just remember, yeah, change your experience. Show that you're capable. But I'll go ahead and pray. Thank you, Lord, for this morning, for everyone that's watching, Lord. I just want to pray that as I was reading this story, I pray that everyone takes that step into being a leader that's also after God's heart. We want to follow in David's example of having courage and absolutely no fear whatsoever, and showing that our perspective, and taking that step and showing to others that the perspective that we have, the things that we want to do, and the conviction that we have in following the Lord will show that the visions that we have will also make an impact in the world. So I pray that we just use this knowledge and this understanding that we also follow after God's heart. Amen.